It's all good, bro. It's all good, man. So how do we say your name? Thiccoq.
Yeah.
Is that your name?
Yeah, like Hickok, but you just
Thiccoq.
Thick.
Why is that your why do you call yourself that?
Yeah, good question. I suppose the name, it's sort of a the Therianthrope, half human, half animal, and comes from the sort of the mentality of the man makes a beast of himself to deal with the pain of being a man. So one of the reasons I suppose that I chose that is because growing up, from time to time, I've had people say or accuse me of being cocky. And so I don't really see it, but people often mistake a certain kind of confidence and durability, I guess, and perceive it as a kind of cockiness, I suppose. So I've always told them, like, man, if you've lived the life that I've lived, the only way to survive it is to have a sense of self-assurance that often comes off as cocky. So in reference to that, just sort of the blend of all of that, of chose the rooster, the sort of the big dick energy of
Got it. Okay.
the
Big
rooster.
rooster energy. So Thiccoq is exactly what it sounds like, pretty much.
Yeah, it's a kind of thick-headed and sort of an attitude or a big dick energy sense of how I've just sort of lived my life in a way. So I ran across I saw an image of a black rooster, an all black rooster. I'm like, dude, that's like my spirit animal, this black rooster here. And so I had a buddy who's an artist, and I said, man, draw me up a kind of an avatar of this black, evil, dark, burnt rooster here. So that's some of the artwork that you may have seen on the timeline there that I post from time to time. It's yeah, it's in reference to that sort of that image of the rooster.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. So you have a series going on about Bukowski, and so I think I first saw you on somebody had you on their like first episode of something. I think it was Matt Pay, the New Right guy.
No, I'm not
Did you go
sure.
on their podcast?
No, I don't think so.
You went on somebody's podcast and you were like their first guest, and I was like, Thiccoq. I wonder who that is. And
You know what?
I can't even. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I think you may have, that was one of my first guests was the Myth Pilot. And so,
Oh yeah, maybe that was it.
yeah,
Right.
because I've always followed and really admired and enjoyed writing the written word, and I have a background many moons ago, a background in publishing. And that was my undergrad degree, was in journalism. So I've always really really enjoyed art generally, but the written word has always appealed to me. And so from time to time, when someone comes up um, that I find would be interesting to speak with, and I reach out to them. And I haven't been doing a lot of these. It's sort of kind of always been on the side, kind of a side project. But yeah, the Myth Pilot was one of my first interviews, and I
He's
think
great. I love him.
kind of yeah, great writer, great writer.
Um, okay, so tell us what your Bukowski like YouTube series is. It's just it's you reading it's some of his late work, I think. Because I just so I mean this should be obvious by now, but I'm just a huge Bukowski guy. I'm a massive Bukowski fan.
Yeah, so I've always really appreciated I know nowadays there's the kind of the philosophers or all the rage, and I really enjoy, following some of the philosophic discussions, particularly those by Athenian Stranger, for example, who does a series that I find very interesting, but at the same time somewhat, esoteric, and I'm left sort of with the sense of like, okay, you're studying Nietzsche, but I'm always reminded of the quote by Anton Chigurh, which is, of course, a Cormac McCarthy quote,
Yep.
which, if the rule you followed
Got
brought
you
you
here. What
friends,
use was the rule?
what use was the rule, right? So if you're going to die in your mom's house or in your aunt's house, and basically, you know, spend the last years of your life in paralysis with syphilis and vascular dementia, what good is it? So, he dies in 1900, actually in Weimar, Germany. So interestingly, exactly 20 years later, also in Weimar, Germany, was born my personal favorite philosopher, Heinrich Karl Bukowski, aka
Yeah. I'm so with you, dude. I love this story, man. Yeah, I cannot get enough of this.
Bukowski. So also born incidentally in Weimar, Germany, in August, the same year that Nietzsche, or the same month that Nietzsche died, but just 20 years later. So what is interesting to me about his work is that he sort of addresses the ordinary lives of poor Americans. He addresses topics that I enjoy, like writing and alcoholism and addiction, madness, relationships with crazy women, and sort of the drudgery of work and life in general. And so I find the arc of his life very interesting as well. And that just kind of a brief introduction to Bukowski for anybody who doesn't know. So at the age of 24, he published his first short story, which was kind of this ironic meta story about, which was called The Aftermath of a Lengthy Rejection Slip. So a couple of years later, he publishes a second work in 46. He's 26 years old. And the name of that story is 20 Tanks from Castle Down. And this was on Black Sun Press. So shortly after that, he became disillusioned with, I suppose, just getting rejected, sending out. I think I've heard stories of him just taping rejection slips to the walls of his room, of his hotel,
Mhm.
and sort of, reveling in the fact that it was, that as an artist, and this is something that's interesting to me as well, the sort of the balance of sort of inspiration and work ethic and producing art, but then the problem of, sending your art out into the world and having it received in some way. And so Bukowski became disillusioned, I guess, with just getting rejected, and the dealing with publishers, writing, producing and not having his work received. And so right around this time, he basically abandoned writing for over a decade and, you know, entered into the working world of dead-end jobs and alcoholism. I think he worked in a pickle factory. I know he worked as a postal clerk, lived in flop houses, and this is a period of time that much of his later work focuses on. So during this period of time, um, yeah, so it was actually later, many years later, in 1955, that he almost basically killed himself from drinking. He went into the hospital with a bleeding ulcer and exited the hospital. And I suppose this brush with death ended up pushing him or reawakening inside of him the desire to write. And so that's something that's fascinating to me as well. You know, that he's 35 years old, he's working dead end jobs. And I suppose, although I don't have any evidence of this, it may have been a kind of brush with death that pushed him to realize, listen, man, maybe it doesn't matter if I'm published or not published, if there's someone out there or not out there. You know, I owe it to myself to write. Like I have something to say, and regardless
So
of
yeah, I'm familiar with the story, and I'm super glad you're going through this. I love hearing this all again. So it was a bleeding ulcer that got him, and he was at like what, like 33 then or something?
yeah,
Do
so
you know
this
what age that was?
yeah, this was in 55, so he was 35 years old.
So he
And
was 35, and this is when so he had been not writing for a decade at this point.
yeah, so in his
So
early
he stopped from 25 to 35, basically.
yeah, it's exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Wow.
in abandon it.
Incredible.
So that's one of the interesting things to me is a kind of the whole discussion of the artist, you know, producing, you know, having the spark, having the juice or the riz or the goods, you know, having something to say, but then having the discipline to sit down and write it out and produce.
Right. Yeah.
And I suppose there's a kind of feedback loop there that you can produce all the great art that you want and put it out into the world. But if no one's out there, you know, to receive it, you know, if you don't have a vehicle of transmission in some way, then, you know, the many people would become disheartened by that, you know, like, well, what's the fucking point? You know, why am I
Yeah.
at all? But yeah, so through and one of the other things that's very interesting to me is that he came up in Los Angeles, basically from the what I feel 40s, 50s, and 60s and 70s. I mean, he died in Los Angeles ultimately, you know. And
Yeah. I've been to his grave
hey, nice. So yeah, so I mean,
at a
he
particularly low moment. I went and visited Book's grave. And I
tells
was living in Long Beach, and it was perfect because it's right there, like San Pedro. I mean, it still takes forever to get to because everything does, but Long Beach is right next to San Pedro, where he's buried, and where I think his last house was, right, with his last wife.
he was out there in San Pedro. So I think that
And you know what it says on his grave, right? It
no, I don't know actually.
says, "Don't try."
Yeah, don't try. Just
It says don't try, and there's a little picture of a boxer. And it's funny though, because like it's one of these things where don't try sums him up so well, but he never said it, he never wrote that. It was something he said, I think, to his like last wife, and she had that put on there.
yeah. So in my opinion, like growing up in LA, you know, in that era, you know, it was probably peak America, quite honestly. So I mean, he grew up through such an interesting time, and he he had what you know, what is it? There's a quote that I'm trying to remember that what is this quote? Yeah, Einstein says creativity is seeing what others see and thinking what no one else ever thought.
Hmm.
And to have this moment of time pass before your eyes, and to have a person who was a noticer of things and just had such a magical way of summarizing that in a way that was sort of self-deprecating and brutally honest. So
Have you ever read his earlier stuff at all? I've read all his letters, and his letters I were maybe my favorite, and not my favorite, but they really helped me fully understand the man. But before we talk about that, have you ever read his early work? So I don't know. I wonder if I think this early work of his must have probably been before the 10-year hiatus. Um, but did you ever read his earlier stuff?
I've read
Like,
some of his stuff. I mean, I've read a little bit of everything and picked through it.
what's really interesting is his early stuff is very flowery. It's like extremely flexing his vocabulary, really trying to blow you away with his intelligent sort of flowery writing. And it's really one of those things where it's like Picasso, right? Where it's like he's showing that he's as good as any MFA by far. Uh, but it's not him, right? It's not him. And it's only in his later stuff does that he develops over time that very signature, ultra simplified, boiled down style.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And so it's funny to see his progression. And I think that that's why he's the best, because and that if you hear his later interviews and stuff, it's like him talking about how bored he is with all other writers and how sort of flowery they are. He has that great video. Have you ever seen that of him being like, other writers will start by saying, I was on the porch and it was a hot summer day, and Mrs. So and so was thinking about the blah blah blah, and it's like I know exactly what he means, and he like lists the number of writers who actually have like real life in their writing, and it's very few.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that that's kind of the life cycle of an artist generally, is you begin by sort of emulating the greats.
Yes, yeah,
So, you start out that there's writers that you love, or there's artists that you emulate and you kind of copy their style. And this may go a long way to explain why he wasn't well received initially in his 20s. So it was later on, after he had sort of abandoned it, like, listen, he hadn't found his own voice
yeah,
until that moment where he was staring death in the face and said, fuck, man, I should, that's it. It's just me and death. And I owe it to myself to say what, and I think that's kind of the true mark of the artist, to close your eyes. Okay, yeah, we're under the constant barrage of influences of all sorts of sources of material and books and art and clippings and quotes and all the rest of it. But then to close your eyes and to be like very still and to think like what naturally bubbles up out of my guts. It's the Rorschach test of life. You look at something, you say, what do I see here? You see a sweet butterfly and someone else sees the angel of death. So whatever it is that you see, whatever comes up inside your mind, be faithful to that, and be unafraid and just let it go, like launch it out, just say it. And maybe it'll be well received, or maybe it won't be well received at all. People could be horrified by whatever is naturally occurring and coming out of you. But yeah, I think, maybe it was a brush with death in his middle 30s, and then, pushing him out to say like, okay, fuck it, I don't care. I'll just say whatever comes to mind, whatever insane thing that I'm writing for me, I write for myself. And so,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that was one of
Totally.
the things, he sometimes gets lumped in with the Beats, although he's, I think, quite different, but there's a kind of,
Oh, he's so different from the
yeah,
Beats. I mean, he's really his own, he reminds me of, I mean, he really reminds me of nobody, but it's, well, I mean, you know who he really is the most like? It's John Fante. So have you ever read John Fante?
have not, but it's now on the list, John Fante.
So he openly admits that he steals everything from John Fante.
Oh, nice.
And so John Fante was a writer, an Italian writer, also in Los Angeles in like the 1930s,
Hmm.
also a massive alcoholic, etc. And then Fante wrote Ask the Dust, which was his famous book. And then I think he waited like 50 years or something and wrote another book that's very similar called Road to Los Angeles right before he died. And Fante, there's something, I think, yeah, it must have taken him a little while to find Fante, and he totally like is Fante. He's completely like his style is better than Fante, but Fante has this really shameless um I think what Bukowski does so well is he doesn't hide at all, right? He doesn't hide. He's not trying to like, the Beats try to freak you out, right? Like, particularly Alec Ginsberg, who I hate. I hate his work.
Yeah, yeah.
I always loved Kerouac for sure, but I hate Ginsberg. And Ginsberg's trying to like spook you, in a way. And even Burroughs is trying to spook you a little bit.
Hmm. Hmm.
Fante just writes about like racism and like attraction to women, etc., in such a like completely straightforward manner
Yeah.
where he's not hiding, but like he's also not trying to, scare you. He's basically like just being completely straightforward. And I
Yeah.
think that, yeah, sorry.
No, no, no. I like that. I think that's a great, a kind of a great assessment. It's neither one or the other.
Yeah.
He's not, and it's something also about removing the ego of the writer, of the artist himself.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Many of
Yeah.
the stories are, about, taking a beer shit and his wallet falls in the toilet and he's digging through the toilet and his shit to take out the money at the racetrack. So, and yeah, this is just like, hey man, it's a day in the life, but it's a brutally honest and of course humorous, right? Because we've all been, I don't know, perhaps we all haven't all been digging through our own shit in the toilet, but we've all had embarrassing moments. We've all had things that have happened to us which were, you know, weird things, and to frame it in such a way that you're not embarrassed to make fun of yourself. You say it in a way that you're not, as you said, you're not hiding. You're not like elevating yourself, but you're also not, it's an honest, I think there's a kind of honesty there where you don't sense some ulterior motive in the,
Right. It's like he's really trying to tell the truth. And there's also, I think what's really different with him is there's a love of life with him.
yes.
There's a genuine love. And he has a poem actually about this. He has a poem about being a really angry kid. And, he starts the best. I always tell everybody the best way to digest Bukowski is to read Run with the Hunted. And
Mm,
Run with the Hunted is an anthology. And the way the anthology works is it takes chapters from his books, poems, short stories, everything, and it does it chronologically, like an autobiography of Bukowski, right? So it starts with like the earliest memories, and then it like goes through the end of his life.
going through the like Ham Rye years where he deals with his early life, talks about his father, his mother's growing up in that sort of way. So
Yeah, and what you realize is like his whole writing, the entire time he was writing only about himself, right? Like that's really what he was doing the entire time. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
And he was writing about himself and he was um like yeah, he kind of like, so anyway, I tell people to read that because that's the best way to like understand Bukowski. I think a lot of people make the mistake of like going and reading Ham on Rye and they think like that's what Bukowski is. And it's like, no, you have to take the artist as a whole. That's what because he's not somebody who has like oh, this novel and that novel. He's a guy who has a body of work, and you really need to understand him as having a body of work, I think. Um,
He's not just a poet, but also a novelist. He did a little bit of everything, and then towards, I guess his lucky break came in '69 when John Martin, who's a publisher of Black Sparrow Press, basically said, "Quit your day job, dude.
yeah,
I need you to
yeah,
quit your post office job." And from that, and at that point, he's 49 years old.
right, yep.
So
And
it
he'd been writing, I think, Thoughts of a Dirty Old Man in some precursor to like the Village Voice kind of thing, like a kind of alt weekly. I actually cut my teeth writing for LA Weekly, which I think was sort of a similar type of thing. It was kind of like a Village Voice thing in LA called, I can't even remember what it was called, but yeah, yeah,
there's so many little, chapbooks and publishers that have come and gone, but it was his kind of, you know, meeting the right person at the right time, someone who really understood his work and was
yeah.
was willing to, because he had by then published here and there, a poem here or there, little stories here and there.
Oh, he had a lot. I mean, he'd
Yeah.
been published a ton. Um, yeah, and actually what I wanted to say is he has a we were talking about like the love of life. He has this poem somewhere along the way where he says he at a certain point he just kind of like decided to start seeing the beauty of life in things. And
Yes.
like slowly but surely, he just like accepted. He was a really angry kid, and then he just like accepted the beauty of everyday life, right?
Mm.
And as somebody who's not a communist, and as I don't know where you are politically, but I'm assuming you're in the same boat, right? Or else why would we have found each other?
Sure.
But there what I always really hate like this instinct, this like Bill Cunningham man on the street instinct of
Right.
trying to glorify like the normal, trying to like glorify the average.
Yes.
Like nothing's more stupid than like a photo exhibition of a bunch of photos of just like nor these are just the normal people of Memphis, Tennessee.
Girl next door.
It's I hate that shit. But the funny thing is Bukowski's my favorite artist of all time, and he kind of does that. Like he kind of reveals like the kind of holiness of everyday life, right? He reveals the beauty of just like drinking beers and roving around town, and he like loves it. There's like he loves the kind of weird ironies of the simplest day in the world, and he's so shameless about his thoughts.
Yes. Yeah. I think that um I think that there's a difference, surely, because that's one of the issues nowadays, that, the sort of exalting the grotesque and
Yeah, exalting the grotesque, right?
geek, and we've all seen the sort of the transition of the Calvin Klein advertisements over the years, from, hot Kate Moss
Yeah, yeah,
to
ugliness takeover.
fatty to like tranny
Yeah,
to
yeah,
like what's next. So, and even it seems that lately the Victoria's Secret has basically said, "Fuck it, dude. We're not playing this game anymore. We're like back to the hot chicks. Like this
yeah,
stuff is not working. We're going back to the." But there's a difference between trying to pull a con on people and convince them that, you know, this is a body positivity movement. It's okay to be grotesquely overweight.
yeah,
It's actually scientifically, it's medically not okay.
yeah,
You're an unhealthy person, and so people are like, everybody wins. Everyone is good. So there's a kind of a dishonest, like, the emperor's wearing no clothes moment where you're looking like, no, man, that guy doesn't have clothes on. No, I'm not going to believe that that is beautiful or great or awesome or incredible. That's clearly disgusting and malformed and sick. It's kind of praising or raising up a sort of form of sickness now. But um, Bukowski is you don't get the sense that he's um trying to that he doesn't have an agenda, right? He's not trying to sell you out on it's kind of like this is the life that I have in the glory of like the majesty and glory of being down and out, you know. So
Yeah.
he's kind
Yeah,
of
it's the majesty and like he really, he really, when I hate when people say this thing saved my life. You know what I mean? Like, when people say that about some artist, but I feel the closest, uh, I feel the most like Bukowski saved my life. I don't think Bukowski saved my life,
in what way?
but he allowed me, reading Bukowski allowed me to basically abandon the like path of the straight and narrow, right? He basically allowed me to go into the dark, like to go into the unknown path,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Because the fear of the unknown is the fear of not having money, of disappointing everyone, of not being able to support yourself, of not being able to support your what, I had a very serious girlfriend and who's now my wife, of not being able to support children, of being shamed, of the people around you not liking, your family and the friends all being like, oh well, he's a tragic tale.
Yeah.
Like I used to be so concerned with those worries, right?
Yes. Yes.
But Bukowski really freed me from that because he made it so that there was, as you said, there's this like majesty in failure. There's this like kind of beauty and freedom in being in the gutter. There's kind of like a real beauty to it. And in a way, actually, and I know this for a fact now, it's much more beautiful than being scared all day. Like it's much better to drink 6 beers on a Monday and have no income than to go on a Monday to your, chop my dick off longhouse job. Trust it is way better to
Yeah.
be a drunk than to do the fear route. I mean, and I honestly don't understand how anybody chooses the fear route. I would, you just slowly, your soul like dies basically.
I think at the end of the day, that's all there is, really. It's just you. It's just you. And to thine own self be true. You now when you start bringing other people into the equation, yeah, you've kind of made either an implied or an explicit promise to that person that like, oh, hey, we got a kid. Like the kid didn't ask to be here, so I gotta maybe not drink 6 beers on a Monday. I could shave it down to maybe
Of
three.
course, of course. No, yeah, absolutely,
But
absolutely.
barring that, and people have to be very cautious about that because there's a very long list of artists whose art was interrupted by the introduction of wife and or kids into the equation because that is absolutely going to pull away from the time that you have available to dedicate to your art. And so that's a kind of a constant that's the artist conundrum, and one of many of them is like, I got a day job, I got to pay my bills, I got a girlfriend or kids or a wife. How do I do this? William Shakespeare himself had a family back in the hinterlands somewhere in England and was like, I'm out. He bounced and went to London, was like, we'll see you guys around. I got shit to do. I'm not going to be, unless I can become utterly obsessed with my art, then I'll never be William Shakespeare. So a lot of, I'm sure that the history is full of people who could have perhaps been William Shakespeare, but there was the production problem. You know, I don't have time. I have writer's block, or I've got a family. So a lot of these things come off as excuses. But yeah, I think that kind of really being down and out and saying, hey, it ain't that bad, it ain't that bad to like, I'm unemployed, I'm living amongst the insane. And the Bukowski arc is an arc of redemption because obviously you and I are today, in the year of our Lord 2024, discussing Charles Bukowski, who is one of the great American poets, right? So he managed to reach his hand into the cookie jar of doom and snatched out, you know, a fistful of golden cookies. He came back with the fleece. He won. He had the hero's journey, and he ended up wealthy and well off and well liked and famous and incredible. And
Yeah, but it's like, isn't that kind of the wrong like lesson in a way, you know? Again, like I feel like for me, it's really more about like I think what Bukowski allows you to do is just not think about this stuff. It's more like it's not like um the Bukowski has this great thing in the end where he says, "They came for me in the end of my life," right? And what he really means is Hollywood. And if you've ever read his book Hollywood, it's so good. It is so good. It's maybe the only truly truthful uh, book about an experience in Hollywood. I mean, William Goldman's Adventures in the Screen Trade. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, was it about making Barfly, his
Yeah,
experience?
it was about making Barfly,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's
Hilarious movie anyway, but
yeah, but it's so good, man. I mean, it is so so good.
yeah,
And it's like sorry, go ahead.
no, no, go ahead.
And it's like it's like he says like they came for me late in my life. Like they basically came, they the horrible parasites more or less is what he means. The exact type of sort of attitude that I'm talking about, I was one of these people. I was a lawyer, man. I mean, I trained to be a lawyer. I mean, I was exactly one of these people who cared about all the wrong things in life. And I cared about competition and these stupid things.
What changed that?
And what?
What changed that for you?
Well, I mean, that's what I'm saying. Bukowski is a big part of it.
The
But
captain said, "Fuck it, dude. I'm quitting law school. I'm out
yeah,
of
no, dude, it's similar to like Tupac, Thug Life kind of thing, right? I mean, like Thug Life is basically the same message. It's saying like, no, you have to live life on your own terms. You cannot be dominated by fear. You cannot be dominated by, am I going to be a household name?
Yes, that
Am I going to make the right decisions so that people know who I am? It's like it's actually like shortening your view. It's shortening your view to focus on everyday life and to focus on being a gangster. I mean, being somebody who is uncompromising. You have your own code. You live by your own code. And Bukowski's code was about telling the truth. And he was about fighting and never compromising, basically, right? Don't try, right? That's his code. Don't try. Don't try to be something, just be. I
be
mean,
it.
that sounds so lame and like yoga mat,
Yeah,
advice, but
well, I mean, someone stole that quote and threw it into Yoda's mouth. There is no try, it's only do. So
oh, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. There you go. Exactly.
I think
Um,
owes Bukowski some royalties on that quote.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I think Bukowski allowed reading Bukowski and reading his ability to stay in the moment and
Mm.
to love himself, right? I mean, to love himself and to say, you know what, if I feel like going and drinking 6 beers today or 15, I'm gonna do it. And I don't really give a shit, like you can judge me and blah blah blah, and God can judge me, whoever can judge me, but I'm gonna do it anyway.
One of the things that I like so much, and is that until the end, he never changed. He never
Yeah.
changed. And there was never an apology, and there was never like a a kind of an asterisk and a down below at the bottom like, well, don't try this at kids, don't try this at home, kids. It was a kind of
Yeah.
like, I'm me, I'm gonna do what I do, he did what he did until the end. He never like there's not the anthology of these are my years in rehab. These are
Yeah,
my
right.
AA
I
rehab.
mean, imagine Bukowski apologizing for anything at all. I mean, like it would be inherently ridiculous for him to do that, you know?
And he deals with all of the beauty and the tragedy. There are times when he contemplates suicide. There are
Yeah.
times when he, you know, is utterly down and out and broke and everything else. But it's like, here's a survivor. Here's a guy who would not change, not for
Yeah.
anybody, for no,
Right.
even when he got famous, because a lot of people, have their, like, one I do actually like Robert Downey Jr. I think he's a very talented actor, but he has the arc of his drug addiction. Now, he might be dead if he hadn't gotten out of that. But now he's gone the other way, and it's like the apology tour for my addictive
Yeah.
phase.
Right. Right.
You have
Yeah,
people,
yeah, yeah. Or even worse, the ones who claim sex addiction. That's the stupidest shit in the world. Like,
or like
what
one
are
of
they
the
talking about?
yeah, like one of the like I don't know which one of the friends, but like I'm in rehab. It's like, bro,
Yeah, 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 right. And it's right. Once you start, this is exactly what I mean. It's like once you start down that path, it's you're just lost. Like you're betraying yourself.
yeah.
And what was so amazing was that he just never he yeah, right. He never allowed himself to go there. He
Mhm.
never allowed himself to like, yeah, be intimidated by anything. And it's like, all right, do whatever and the way that he made up for it, and this is why he's the greatest. He's the most pure artist ever, really, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Is the way that he made up for it is just by putting everything into the work, by just always going back to the typewriter and always putting everything into the typewriter. Like he just was the perfect engine of like trauma and pain directed into the creation of art, It's like Michael Jordan, Michael Jordan's the greatest of all times because he took everything bad and he just processed it into like pure aggression on the court. Like that's what Bukowski is the absolute best at. Like he just took everything and put it on the page. And if you read his letters, what really made me love his letters is that he's not really like you would think in his letters he would be like I don't give a shit what happens, right? But no, he was like relentless with hitting up his editors every day, being like, where is my publication, where is my money, what else are you publishing? But also doing it in his signature style of being like slightly insane, like but it makes you be like, oh damn, like that's what that's like behind the scenes. Like he's just putting everything into his career as a writer. And yeah, so
And
yeah.
so, and in the end, he was like incredibly prolific. So he's written thousands of poems,
Yeah.
hundreds of short stories, and I think over 60 books, uh,
Yeah.
six
Yeah.
novels. So it's one of the things so you can sort of contrast. I remember one of the only actually great Red Hot Chili Peppers album was the Blood Sugar Sex Magic, and in it there's a line where Kiedis says, I sit on the porch and read Bukowski. But you have to note the trajectory of the Red Hot Chili Peppers straight into shit. Like they've just beclowned themselves now. And I think
Yeah.
that's part of the problem with them is exactly what we're saying Bukowski did right, is that the Chili Peppers turned their back on who they were. That okay, it's just like they're the balladeers now, putting out little ballads, and they're all not that you want your rock star to be a drug addict forever, but they've turned into a shadow or a phantasm of who and what they were, the band that we you know loved back in the day, and now they're ridiculous and doing yoga and all the rest of the shit. So again, it's like whatever, they just should break up the band or rename it something else, some, the lesbian tour or something like Lilith, the Lilith Fair band, house band or something. So, you have a lot of the kind of, oh, hey, who we used to be, we've turned our back on that. And now we're somebody else, something in the middle that's not appealing to really anybody. Because
Right.
we were there from the beginning. We're like, your music doesn't appeal to me any longer. So that's something that Bukowski himself avoided doing. And I think another person that comes to mind who is unapologetic was Hunter S. Thompson in the same way, is that now his politics, I don't align with his politics. However, until the very end, he was like, I am who I am, and I don't have anything more to give. And he did a Hemingway and had his ashes blown out over his property in California. So there was a similar, you don't have the Hunter S. Thompson apology tour.
That is true. Yeah, it's funny because like most people compare me to Hunter S. Thompson, and so they always assume that I love Hunter S. Thompson because Hunter obviously was much more of a journalist than
Yes.
Bukowski, right? I mean, and I'm much more like that naturally. Um, but I don't like Hunter S. Thompson. I don't like his work. I don't like him.
Yeah,
I don't like him at all. Because he's the lefty
correct.
and he is kind of a nerd and he's very judgy. I mean, that's what's also incredible about Bukowski is sometimes he's so judgmental of
But
people. But
he
what?
would be judgmental of. So he's judging people, but you feel a companionship, like, fuck yeah, he's making fun of
Yeah,
the people you and I would naturally make fun of as well. So
yeah, yeah,
when
yeah.
he is judgy, he does it in the right direction.
Yeah, it's whereas for me, like what's his name?
Thompson.
Thompson always seemed a little kind of like resentful, like he seemed kind of like sniggly at the people that he didn't like, whereas Bukowski it just seemed so pure.
Yeah.
But I think what I really like about what you're saying and what is very true is that Hunter did share Bukowski's total uncompromisingness. Like he was also like, I am just not going to compromise. Like I'm not going to ever try and make you like me really, and so I agree. I agree that that's what's great about Hunter as well.
And so, politics aside and all the rest of it, I certainly more closely identify with Bukowski and his work, and I appreciate his work. So, yeah, an auction a couple of years ago, and they were auctioning, or they were books, and I ended up winning a copy of The Captain is Out to Lunch, and the sailors have taken over the ship. So, this is like an interesting. It was his last book. It was published posthumously 3 years after his death. And so I ended up getting like a first edition hardcover. It's a kind of collaboration with Robert Crumb. It's signed by the artist. So I was like, oh, I love this.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah, so I'm
interesting.
like, this Black Sparrow Press, right? So in a kind of a little box and all the rest of it. So like, this is like a nice book. So I'm like, okay, this is going to be great. And as I read through it, I thought, so what is it? It's published posthumously, but it's a, basically journal entries from Bukowski at the end of his life. And so he's already well known, he's already well established, he's already got money, he's living his life in California there. And it's just little. So as I began to read it, I'd started a YouTube channel and it was very not going anywhere. And I'd done a couple of interviews with some, certain people. And it was like, okay, well, I got this book and I thought, well, this would be great because it like really lends itself to, it's a journal entry, it's dated, it's like to, woke up, did this, did that, went here, went to the racetrack. It's just sort of the last days of his life and focuses on gambling and writing and aging and everything else. So the entries were short and they were a length that you could read through them. I don't know, do a recording, read through it, 10 minutes or less, and then just kind of like I don't claim to have any sort of my video editing skills are poor at best, but like just using, basic like iMovie or whatever, reading the book, throwing the audio into iVideo, and then just adding over, the text or any whatever other images that he may reference a racetrack. So trying to figure out which racetrack he was at, and sort of doing a photo montage of the, where he was and what was going on and different things like that that he references. So yeah, I cranked out, I guess, the first 25 in the series. And so just reading them kind of chronologically and labeling them like entry one, entry two, entry three. And they always open up kind of the same. You open the book and it's, you zoom in on the title, it's the date there. And then I think the first couple I read them, I was attempting to read them in Bukowski voice, which is, I'm not sure if I'm proud of that decision, but I kind of pushed away from it and just reading it in my own sort of natural reading voice, and reading through it. And so kind of uploading them. And in many ways, you're faced in that case with kind of the dilemma of, I'm, sending them out into the world. And what is the reception on this? Are people watching them or not watching them? Or are people enjoying them or not enjoying them? Getting that, that feedback loop, which I think is important, unless you're in the mood to write a whole bunch of poems and sit on it. And if you absolutely don't care if people are reading or enjoying your work, then you may as well change your Twitter handle to like Emily Dickinson, brah. Because there's a person who just didn't give a fuck. She's writing poetry for the sake of, for whatever purpose, whatever it is, and just putting him in a file and putting them under her bed, and like
Right,
burn
yeah.
shit when I die. So there's a kind of a purism there, but that's kind of the conundrum of the artist, So I've made something, and I floated it out into the ether webs, the interwebs, and like, oh well, now what? So I one of the things that I think it's really, really good if for what's called the dissident right are the number of publishers that are available now, so that there's a sense, if you have written something and you're motivated and determined to keep writing, that there is an actual avenue for you to, if your work is good and if you keep, putting in the reps, that there are actual publishers now on the dissident right that are ready to that are actually experiencing success and are making a difference. And I think that in the life of Bukowski, it was the Black Sparrow Press, which actually enabled him to quit his day job. Now, as an anon Twitter poster, I'm not, this is, that's not the intent. I'm not over here trying to quit my day job. But it's nice,
Right.
the idea that there is an outlet now and that there's an opportunity for people, and which I hope would be motivating. And as I think the passage, prize, for example, and it's like, hey, man, we're looking for great stories. Ren has his fiction contest. We're looking for great stories, great pulp stories. Like if you have something written, if you've written something, submit it. And if it's good, we'll publish it. And then, the joy of seeing your work out in the world and having people respond to it, I think should be motivating to encourage people who do feel that they have something to say to, like, okay, man, just sit down and write it out, sit down and write it out, like take a chance, take a chance and put it out into the world and see how people respond to it.
So what are you working on exactly? When you say that you are working on things, what do you mean exactly?
Well, for myself, I think probably the best thing that could ever happen to me is to go to prison long term.
Yeah, I've had that exact same thought.
You know what? Because I've got all kinds of stuff just floating around in my brain. And like if I were locked in a room and forced to do nothing but write, I've got like off the top of my head three screenplays that I would crank out.
Yeah, same, dude.
Immediately that I've been like that are well developed. And so that's one of my problems too, is that like I have a very rich and rewarding private life, personal life in real life. So like, and then I've got like a very active and fertile imagination. So I can sit by myself and I think about the characters will bubble up. Like people always say when they get bored, I'm like, only boring people get bored, man. If you're bored, then you're boring. I can understand like, your wheels are turning and you're looking for somewhere to engage it. But, at any point, I've got all these characters that are floating around in my mind and stories that I love and that, I've worked through like, man, how do I get him from point A to point B? And I'll see someone do something like, okay, that's how we solved that problem. Okay. So I'm kind of plotting out things and scenes and things. I'll jot it down and stuff like that. But I don't know that I've taken anything very seriously. For me, it's a kind of I think a production issue of just sitting down and cranking stuff out. But yeah, there's so many things, that I think about that I would love to just sit down and kind of get it out. I know that you've interviewed, Please Call Me Christ, PCM Christ.
Yeah, he's cool.
Yeah, man. So he's like had a book that he's working on, and he basically just shut the Twitter down and was like, let's buckle down and write the shit. He's got a
Yeah.
well, but that's and then recently won the short story pulp competition from Man's World and got the top spot. So that right there is I think a very, very motivating, because this came in right in the wake of him saying, like, fuck it, dude. I'm like just sick of it. It's writing like all art, my opinion, all art begins with some kind of writing. Almost all of it, except for like maybe a fine art, visual art, but whether it's a film, music, a poetry, writing, any of that, all of it begins with a person sitting down in front of the blank page and
Yeah.
putting something on the page. And you have to almost be insane to sit and do it. Like,
Well, besides music, right? Music is the one that's not like that. I
well, you
mean, but I tend to agree that writing is the most pure form of creation for sure.
but
Um,
even with music, you're sitting down. I mean, for Mozart or Beethoven or whatever, they're sitting alone in a room, putting little dots on the scales and thinking the music and putting the words. And then obviously, at some point, you bring it out and you're running through it with an orchestra and things like that. But so much of art, I think, that you go to the cinema, but that started out as someone just sitting and writing it out, writing a script or having an idea and having the courage or the bravery to sit and say, maybe they'll love it, maybe they won't love it. This is going to probably take hundreds of hours of my life. I will invest hundreds of hours, if not thousands of hours and years of my life to get all this down. And it may end up being nothing at all. And that could end up being just a total waste of my time. But at the same time, it's like, well, why not? Why not try? Don't try. Don't try. Do.
yeah, right, right, right. But the thing, I don't know, just to bring it back to the discussion of like what's happening in our space though. The thing that I like, I've had PCM Christ, I've had a bunch of these like writer guys. I really like TR Hudson's first book, which is called um Automaton. And it's funny because the movie Civil War is basically exactly that book. It's like a very, very similar, but of course his book is like way better. And I really hope that somebody eventually turns his book into a movie, which maybe they will. The problem, though, that I want to like say to everybody, and I always say this, is the landscape has changed, right? So I think that a lot of our guys, since we're all these sort of deep down, sensitive boy, smart guys, right?
Sensitive young man.
Since we're, yes, we are sensitive young men, which I've said for a long time. Uh, we see the things of the past and we have these relationships with these books, right? Like somewhat like mine with Bukowski, or
Yes.
somebody reads a novel that they blows them away, right? And the thing is, it's always going to be autodidact, right? It's like always going to be like almost this secret that they've found, like they've come across this book and they're nobody's ever told them that what's in there is in there because they are normies, right? They're probably like suburban kids
Sure,
who've been told to read Beloved 17 times.
sure.
Which, by the way, Beloved is very, very well done, but it's not going to, like, for a young white guy, it's not going to do anything for you.
Yeah.
Whereas if you come across, everybody's been sending me this book, Stoner. Have you seen this book, Stoner? Have you read this?
Oh, no, I'm not familiar
Yeah,
with it.
it's by this guy, John Williams. But anyway, a lot of our guys in our space like this book, Stoner, because it's about this kind of lonely guy who's a little bit blue collar. But anyway, my point is that a lot of them find these novels and they have the instinct to recreate the novel. And the issue, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't go write a screenplay if that's what you want to do, right? What I will say is don't do that if you want to be a professional, right?
Explain
If you
that.
want to be a professional writer in today's world, which is what I am, you have to do things differently. You have to live with the times that we're in. And I think very, very few people have figured out how to do that. And you should look at those people. You should look at the people who have figured out how to do that. BAP does that. Delicious Tacos, more or less. I mean, he's not really fully professional even either, but the way that he writes and the way what he does, Substack, blogging, self-published novels, that's what you should be following. BAP podcast and then hit book and then big Twitter account, right?
Yeah.
You got to be following those crumbs versus sitting in your room and finishing a novel and expecting that you're going to give that novel to somebody and it's going to explode. That's just not, that doesn't happen. That just literally, there are zero examples of that. So to think that your novel, by the sheer force of how good it is going to make a difference, it's just not going to happen. That's just not how it goes today. So you have to follow the path of what does work today, And so I hate Twitter. I can't wait until I never have to use Twitter again, man. I would fucking love to never set foot on that app ever again. And all the people who spend all day there, I can't wait to never talk to them ever again. But it's a necessary evil, man. I got it. You have to do it. And, dude, and you know what? Some of the best training I've ever received as a writer, the reason why I can write a story on my Substack and it'll get 500,000 views, which has happened to me a bunch of times, is because I learned how to be a copywriter. Like I'm a professional copywriter. So I learned the skill of writing commercially. And this is really what's missing. The problem with self-publishing, the problem with it being so easy is people don't cut their teeth in such a way where they have to do it for money, Like I learned how to do it for money because I had to do it for money. I was bartending. I left law and I was a bartender. And so that commercial pull was important, and that's also Bukowski. I mean, yeah, he had day jobs, so he was almost like an anon kind of, but he also was a professional writer. He figured out how to do it professionally. And so that's what I worry about our guys in our scene who they're going to spend all this time writing a book in a vacuum, and then they're going to self-publish it, and they're going to be like, well, what the hell did I spend years of my life doing this for if nobody was ever going to read it? You know, you're going to throw it out on Amazon, and you know, a couple people, you're going to get 500, but best case scenario, you'll get 500 people to buy it, you know, just like everything else. And then that's it, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's my fear.
That needs to be floated somehow in the wake of a successful presence, somehow online or in subs,
Exactly.
or
Yeah.
creating some buzz or some such thing.
Yeah. The book needs to be like a touch point. You know, it needs to be one of the things like Delicious Tacos, his work, actually, his novels are not my favorite. I don't know if you're a tacos fan. Do you like Delicious Tacos? He's
Sure.
pretty Bukowski similar. What?
Follow. Yeah, I follow Delicious
Yeah.
Tacos. Yeah.
So he's a great, great writer. And, but you know, if he had just written his one fiction book that he has and put it out there, nobody would have read it. You know, it's like the fact that it's his blog, it's his tweets,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what it is to be a professional male white writer in today's world, because you're certainly have absolutely zero chance in the mainstream at all. They're gonna never ever publish you.
What?
Sorry, what?
No, no, no. So what I'm sensing then is a kind of the nexus between the connective tissue between the artist and the audience. A kind of how do you, because that is sort of the question. Many artists are shy, many of them, so they've written something and it's great, and so like then what do you do? And that's kind of the question, because there's this sort of the P.T. Barnum element that's required now of like, because the world, so like we can take the two things. One, talent. Are you actually an artist? Are you producing things of any worth at all? And then two, the sense of production. Are you able to produce? Are you putting out content and things like that? So we see examples of people who are putting out content which they have no talent. You can turn on pop radio and that's this all day long. People are cranking out endless, talentless, shit. But then there are some who have managed to produce something which is actually quite excellent. But then the question of, well, how do I get this into that? How do we get eyes on this? How do I be a promoter? How do I promote myself? How do I
Yeah, well, and
how do
again, and this is what reading Bukowski's letters really made me, and I really suggest everybody does this, because you're seeing a guy who behind the scenes is working so hard at not just writing, but getting the shit published.
Yes.
Like he is night and day obsessively chasing publishers and it's not just this pure thing. So many of our guys, they think I'm just going to write this thing and it's going to be so beautiful that everybody recognizes it. That is not how art ever works. You're talking about like maybe, I mean, not even just today as like a white male writer. You're talking about, or a right-leaning writer, whatever you want to call us. You could be black too. They probably, if you were right-leaning, they'd be even less down. But you look at the art game, right? Look at the contemporary art game. My wife is in contemporary art. She works at a huge art gallery, and the quality of the work is almost completely irrelevant. Like you can put anything on the wall. If you have the right story and the right connections, that is what being an artist is. That's like 90% of it. So this whole idea that my talent is the most pedestrian, normal thing in the world. Like the talent is 10% of what you need, and even sometimes not being talented is even better. Like it's like if you're not talented in such a way where you're kind of an odd toy, that can be even better. So like the talent part of it is important, of course, and being able to match your talent with your drive and being able to express the fullness of who you are is very important. But just the pure talent, right, is that will come in order for people to even know what that means. You have to jump so many levels up, right?
Well, I think there's so many examples to me. I don't remember what the artist or the tattoo artist's name was, but I found myself horrified, amazed. There was a tattoo artist who was specialized in this kind of like scribble tattoo, which all the kids love nowadays. The poke and stick shit tattoo. It's like, okay, it looks like you look like you're,
Yeah, stick and poke. Yep.
yeah, right. So you look like the desk, the detention desk. You look like a scribbled on, gouged, you know. So this guy was like, I don't know how million, 8 million, 10 million followers on somewhere on the Instagram. He's out there tattooing famous people, and the tattoos are literal shit. It's
Yeah, exactly,
like a
exactly. Dude,
child.
Rupi Kaur, you ever read Rupi Kaur's Instagram poetry?
No, I
It's the
haven't.
worst thing in the world. It is the worst thing imaginable.
I was about
Yet
to write it down,
she's
and
maybe the
now
most famous American writer.
Ruth.
Her or Amanda, who's our national poet laureate black woman who's also a supermodel?
No,
Amanda Gorman. Have you ever read fucking Amanda Gorman's writing?
no.
It's the worst thing in the world. Yet
Poet laureate.
there are poet laureates of our time. And you can sit around and say, oh, well, that's not fair. But of course it's not fair, but you still have to play the game anyway.
Life is not fair. So get with it.
Yeah.
Figure out the ways that it's not fair, and
Yeah. Act accordingly. Exactly. Exactly.
so you can see so much. The greatest tattoo artist that ever lived was probably some one-armed old Singaporean lady in a port, in the 17th
Right.
century.
Yeah. The greatest artist who ever lived. But right. Exactly. It's like, what
Nobody
does
ever
that
heard her
mean?
name,
Yeah. Yeah.
but she was the greatest sculptor. So yeah, I mean, it's one thing if you've got stacks and stacks. I'm reminded of the example of what is this John Kennedy Toole who wrote
Yes. Yes. I was going to bring that exact. That's like a very pure example. But yeah, no, say that example. Sorry.
rare example though, and this is a guy who wrote a Confederacy of Dunces, which I think is an entertaining and enjoyable book to read, but wrote it, lived it with his mom, was an utter absolute loser, killed himself, and then his book was discovered after he was found dead. And well, I think he won a Pulitzer Prize or something like that.
Right. Or Van Gogh, right? Van Gogh is kind of the
Well,
typical example of this as
history's
well.
filled
Somebody
with
who had no
examples.
success and then he dies and then everybody finds his stuff.
Yeah, so the world is, I mean, unless that's the route that people want to go, but I don't think that that is the route. And without selling out, it's kind of like, well, where, find that middle ground. And so back to Bukowski, I think he is such a rare and incredible example of someone who navigated all of those things. He he had the juice, he had the gift, he had the riz or whatever the hell. He had the talent, he had the goods, and he produced, he had an incredible body of work, and he had the wherewithal to get it out there. He had the PT bar. He didn't have the overwhelming shyness or antisocialness of many artists who were like, I don't want to go out. And
Well, but yeah, the shyness can be part of your thing though. Like, what do they always say about if you read a movable feast, it's basically Hemingway hanging around with Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald, and he's talking about the entire time about how soft F. Scott Fitzgerald is. How he's like kind of this like little bitch,
oh boy.
and but that was F. Scott Fitzgerald's like kind of thing. Like he was kind of a fey, weak little bitch, and also shy, and also like not super bold. I'm not saying there's only like one way to do it, right? I'm not trying to say that. Anyway, sorry, keep going. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I mean, I was basically done with the thought, but it's like he was able to navigate that, the nexus between, so I have a body of work. How do I get it out there? How do I get eyes on it? How do I get the right eyes on it? People who will actually understand it and moreover, beyond understand it, like appreciate it and value it. And then, so that is, I think he is a kind of a fossil maybe of someone who came through and managed to, that Frank Sinatra, I did it my way. And that's it. It's very rare, and then yeah, of course, at that time there wasn't Twitter. However, his version of Twitter were all the many little literary magazines and scenes, and there must have been some sort of open mic night. We have to imagine Bukowski was out there at some point, trying to ex drunkenly explore.
Yeah, probably right. Or well, I mean, he was more doing that with his writing opportunities. He was taking every writing opportunity he could. Oh,
Yeah,
we I mean, also as a cartoonist, right? He was also a cartoonist.
and whatever was necessary. But I think that as he became famous toward the end, he opened up and continued to, well, he had opportunities to, he wrote a screenplay, so he did that. He, a little this, little that, over here, over there, get your name out here, there, go on
Yeah.
poetry reading tours, which took on a life of its own, and he became famous for that as well. So it's kind of like the full, he ran the full circle there. So, and he's got so many things to say about so many different kind of facets of life. So, you can always, it's kind of like you can open up a book of Bukowski poetry, and there's always something there that's relevant and worthwhile and kind of touching and interesting and thought provoking. So, and that to me is sort of the germ of what art is to just make you feel something. You want
Yeah.
something.
Totally, man. Well, dude, thank you so much for coming on. I got to wrap this up because I got to go to a thing here. But so yeah, tell us besides your Bukowski series on YouTube, which of course I'll link to, what else do you have coming up and where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm on X, I guess the artist formerly known as Twitter, at Thiccoq. And yeah, that began as just sort of shit posting. And I suppose there's a moment in time where, your reach extends to the point where you have to consider like cleaning it up and not being a circus monkey and throwing shit at people all the time, but or maybe not, I don't know. But yeah, I'm on Twitter. I've got a YouTube channel, Thiccoq Productions. You can find that at Thiccoq on YouTube, and just doing interviews with different people, artists, people that I find interesting. Sometimes a poetry reading here or there, a short story reading here or there, and just things that I found interesting. I had a friend who had insomnia, and she asked me to put out some to read Dr. Seuss. So I went through a series of Dr. Seuss books, which I read and put online, which are a little bit creepy. So I'm not even sure what the audience for that would be. But yeah, there's just kind of stuff out there. And
Interesting.
yeah, you know,
Awesome, man. Well, dude, I'll link everybody to that. And yeah, thanks for joining, man. I love any talk about Bukowski. I'll always do. So thanks for all your knowledge. Really appreciate it.
cool. Good talking to you. We'll see you online. Thanks, man.